That one thingy with the slime seems interesting. I don't mind watching more if you want to watch more. Making bacon bits. Making bacon bits.
Hi.
Za, hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just waiting for if you can shut the door. Please. Please. The glare is real. Heroes believe.
Get the mic. Get the book. And my drink.
I made literally dinner and you're complaining about a few things.
Goes around getting things.
I brought you a snack earlier too. Yeah, I'll remember this tomorrow. Ceequin will remember this.
This is dirty, so.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty obvious. Cinderella, Cinderella. Everyone's you're everybody's maid.
Ah, look, that's started.
Started or finished?
Started. It's
Oh,
all for it. Yep, you're indeed in the dream.
ugh. Charlie Brown, ugh.
Tobacco says,
Happy, happy, happy face. Everybody gets settled. Everybody get your drinks. Get comfy. Use the bathroom if you need to. Not in that order specifically. Ugh, ads have to be long. Oh my gosh, we're good? No. Oh no. Make my phone so I can see chat.
Gabby says he's eating top off.
Okay. I'm trying to, but I'm trying to get out of full screen for the video because when it's full screen, it doesn't let me see the chat. But there's no button on it. I suck at this. Hold on, I think I figured it out. There we go. Ha, I can see now. Gently put my phone here and disturb all of the headphone users with my horrible scritchy. This phone's gonna fall and it's gonna make a loud noise. I'll just put that there. Put that right there. Okay. So, we were reading the tales or the chronicles of Narnia. We'd reached the voyage of the Dawn Treader, and we had just gotten off of the island, the far. I forgot the land, those specific islands, the Lone Islands, that's what they're called, where they had just tricked the local magistrate or the mayor, whoever was in charge of the islands, to abolish slavery and put one of the traveling I forgot the lords who had been sent out by Caspian's uncle, Miraz, to search to the east in charge, and now we had reached a storm. We'll try this again. Chapter 5, The Storm and What Came of It. It was nearly 3 weeks after their landing that the Dawn Treader was towed out of Narrowhaven Harbor. Very solemn farewells had been spoken, and a great crowd had assembled to see her departure. There had been cheers and tears, too, when Caspian made his last speech to the Lone Islanders and parted from the Duke and his family. But as the ship, her purple sail still flapping idly, drew further from the shore, and the sounds of Caspian's trumpets from the poop came fainter across the water, everyone became silent. Then she came into the wind. The sails swelled out, the tug cast off and began rowing back. The first real wave ran up under the Dawn Treader's prow, and she was a live ship again. The men off duty went below. Drinian took the first watch on the poop, and she turned her head eastward round the south of Avra. The next few days were delightful. Lucy thought she was the most fortunate girl in the world as she woke each morning to see the reflections of the sunlit water dancing on the ceiling of her cabin, and looked round at all the nice new things she had got on the Lone Islands. Sea boots and buskin and cloaks and jerkins and scarves. Then she would go out on deck and take a look from the forecastle at a sea which was brighter blue each morning, and drink in an air that was a little warmer day by day. After that came breakfast, and such an appetite as one only has at sea. She spent a good deal of time sitting on the little bench in the stern, playing chess with Reepicheep. It was amusing to see him lifting the pieces, which were far too big for him, with both paws and standing on tiptoe if he made a move near the center of the board. He was a good player, and when he remembered what he was doing, he usually won. But every now and then Lucy won, because the mouse did something quite ridiculous, like sending a knight into the danger of a queen and castle combined. This happened because he had momentarily forgotten it was a game of chess, and was thinking of a real battle, making the knight do what he would certainly have done in its place. For his mind was full of forlorn hopes, death or glory charges, and last stands. But this pleasant time did not last. There came an evening when Lucy, gazing idly astern at the long furrow or wake they were leaving behind them, saw a great rack of clouds building itself up in the west with amazing speed. Then a gap was torn in it, and a yellow sunset poured through the gap. All the waves behind them seemed to take on unusual shapes, and the sea was a drab or yellowish color like a dirty canvas. The air grew cold. The ship seemed to move uneasily, as if she felt danger behind her. The sail would be flat and limp one minute, and wildly full the next. When she was noting these things, and wondering at a sinister change which had come over the very noise of the wind, Drinian cried, "All hands on deck!" In a moment, everyone became frantically busy. The hatches were battened down, the galley fire was put out, men went aloft to reef the sail. Before they had finished, the storm struck them. It seemed to Lucy that a great valley in the sea opened just before their bows, and they rushed down into it, deeper down than she would have believed possible. The great gray hill of water, far higher than the mast, rushed to meet them. It looked like certain death, but they were tossed to the top of it. Then the ship seemed to spin round. A cataract of water poured over the deck. The poop and the forecastle were like two islands with a fierce sea between them. Up aloft, the sailors were lying out along the yard, desperately trying to get control of the sail. A broken rope stood out sideways in the wind, as straight and stiff as if it were a poker. "Get below, ma'am," bawled Trinian. And Lucy, knowing that ladiesmen and landswomen were a nuisance to the crew, began to obey. It was not easy. The Dawn Treader was listing terribly to starboard, and the deck sloped like the roof of a house. She had to clamber round to the top of the ladder, holding onto the rail, and then stand by while two men climbed up it, and then get down it as best she could. It was all well she was already holding on tight, for at the foot of the ladder another wave roared across the deck, up to her shoulders. She was already almost wet through with spray and rain, but this was colder. Then she made a dash for the cabin door and got in and shut out for a moment the appalling sight of the speed for which they were rushing into the deck. But not, of course, the horrible confusion of creaking, groaning, snappings, clatterings, roarings, and boomings which only sounded more alarming below than they had done on the poop. And all the next day, and all the next, it went on. It went on till one could hardly even remember a time before it had begun, and there always had to be 3 men at the tiller, and it was as much as 3 could do to keep it any kind of course. And there was always had to be men at pump, and there was hardly any rest for anyone, and nothing could be cooked, and nothing could be dried, and one man was lost overboard, and they never saw the sun. When it was over, Eustace made the following entry in his diary. September 3rd. The first day for ages when I had been able to write. We had been driven before a hurricane for 13 days and nights. I know that because I kept careful count, though the others all say it was only 12. Pleasant to be embarked on a dangerous voyage with people who can't even count right. I have had a ghastly time, up and down, enormous waves, hour after hour, usually wet to the skin, and not even an attempt at giving us proper meals. Needless to say, there's no wireless or even a rocket, so no chance of signaling anyone for help. It all proves what I keep on telling them, the madness of setting out in a rotten little tub like this. It would be bad enough even if one was decent people and one was with decent people instead of friends in human form. Caspian and Edmund are simply brutal to me. The night we lost our mast, that's only one stump left now, though I was not at all well, they forced me to come on deck and work like a slave. Lucy shoved her oar in by saying that Repetit was longing to go, only he was too small. I wonder she didn't see that everything that little beast does is all for the sake of showing off. Even at her age, she ought to have that amount of sense. Today, the beastly boat is level at last, and the sun's out. We have all been jawing about what to do. We have food enough, pretty beastly stuff, most of it, to last for 16 days. The poultry were all washed overboard. Even if they hadn't been, the storm would have stopped them laying. The real trouble is water. 2 casks seem to have got a leak knocked in them and are empty. Narnian efficiency again. On short rations, half a pint a day each. We've got enough for 12 days. There's lots of rum and wine, but even they realize that would only make them thirstier. If we could, of course, the sensible thing would be to turn west at once and make for the Lone Islands, but it took us 18 days to get where we are, running like mad with a gale behind us. Even if we got it in east wind, it might take us far longer to get back, and at present there's no sign of an east wind. In fact, there's no wind at all. As for rowing back, it would take far too long, and Caspian says the men couldn't row on half a pint of water a day. I'm pretty sure this is wrong. I tried to explain that perspiration really cools people down, so the men would need less water if they were working. He didn't take any notice of this, which is always his way when he can't think of an answer. The others all voted on going on in the hopes of finding land. I felt it my duty to point out that we didn't know there was any land ahead of us, and try to get them to see the dangers of wishful thinking. Instead of producing a better plan, they had the cheek to ask me what I proposed. So I just explained coolly and quietly that I had been kidnapped and brought away on this idiotic voyage without my consent, and it was hardly my business to get them out of the scrape. September 4th. Still becalmed. Very short rations for dinner, and I got less than anyone. Caspian very clever at helping, and thinks I don't see. Lucy, for some reason, tried to make up to me by offering me some of hers, but that infuriating pig Edmund wouldn't let her. Pretty hot sun, terribly thirsty all evening. September 5th. Still becalmed and very hot, feeling rotten all day, and sure I've got a temperature. Of course, they haven't the sense to keep a thermometer on board. September 6th. A horrible day. Woke up in the night knowing I was feverish and must have a drink of water. Any doctor would have said so. Heavens knows I'm the last person to get any unfair advantage, but I never dreamed that this water rationing would be meant to apply to a sick man. In fact, I would have woken the others up and asked for some, only I thought it would be selfish to wake them. So I got up and took my cup and tiptoed out of the black hole we sleep in, taking care not to disturb Caspian and Edmund, for they had been sleeping badly since the heat and the short water began. I always try to consider others when they're nice to me or not. I got out all right into the big room, if you can call it a room, where the rowing benches and the luggage are. The thing of water's at the end. It was all going beautifully, but before I'd drawn a cupful, who should catch me but that little spy Reap? I tried to explain that I was going on deck for a breath of air. The business about the water had nothing to do with him, and he asked me why I had a cup. He made such a noise that the whole ship was roused. They treated me scandalously. I asked, as I think anyone would have, why Reepicheep was thinking about the water cask in the middle of the night. He said that he was too small to be any use on deck. He did sentry over the water every night so that one more man could go to sleep. Now comes their rotten unfairness. They all believed him. Can you beat it? I had to apologize, or the dangerous little brute would have been at me with his sword. And then Caspian showed up in his true colors as a brutal tyrant and said out loud for everyone to hear that anyone found stealing water in future would get 2 dozen. I don't know what this meant till Edmund explained it to me. It comes in the sort of books these Pevensie kids read. After this cowardly threat, Caspian changed his tune and started being patronizing. Said he was sorry for me, and that everyone felt just as feverish as I did, and we must all make the best of it, etc., etc. Odious, stuck-up prig. Stayed in bed all day today. September 7th. A little wind today, but from the west. Made a few miles eastward with part of the sail set on what Drinian calls the jury mast. That means the bowsprit? Bowsprit set upright and tied. They call it lashed to the stump of the real mast. Still terribly thirsty. September 8th. Still sailing east, I stay in my bunk all day now and see no one except Lucy till the 2 friends come into bed. Lucy gives me a little of her water ration. She says girls don't get as thirsty as boys. I had often thought this, but it ought to be more generally known at sea. September 9. Land in sight, a very high mountain, a long way off to the southeast. September 10. Mountain is bigger and clearer, but still a long way off. Gulls again today, for the first time since I don't know how long. September 11. Caught some fish and had them for dinner. Dropped anchor at about 7 p.m. in 3 fathoms of water in a bay of this mountainous island. That idiot Caspian wouldn't let us go ashore because it was getting dark and he was afraid of savages and wild beasts. Extra water ration tonight. What awaited them on the island was going to concern Eustace more than anyone else, but it couldn't be told in his words because after September 11, he forgot about keeping his diary for a long time. When morning came with a low gray sky, but very hot, the adventurers found they were in a bay encircled by such cliffs and crags that it was like a Norwegian fjord. In front of them, at the head of the bay, there was some level land heavily outgrown with trees that appeared to be cedars, through which a rapid stream came out. Beyond them was a steep ascent ending in a jagged ridge, and behind that a vague darkness of mountains which ran into dull-colored clouds so that you could see their tops. You could not see their tops. The nearer cliffs at each side of the bay were streaked here and there with lines of white, which everyone knew to be waterfalls, though at that distance they did not show any movement or make any noise. Indeed, the whole place was very silent, and the water in the bay as smooth as glass, and reflected every detail of the cliffs. The scene would have been pretty in a picture, but it was rather oppressive in real life. It was not a country that welcomed visitors. The whole ship's company went ashore in 2 boatloads, and everyone drank and washed deliciously in the river, and had a meal and a rest before Caspian set 4 men back to keep the ship, and the day's work began. There was everything to be done. The casks must be brought ashore, and the faulty ones mended if possible, and all refilled. A tree, a pine if they could get it, must be felled and made into a new mast. Sails must be repaired, a hunting party organized to shoot any game the land might yield. clothes to be washed and mended, and countless small breakages on board to be set right. The Dawn Treader herself, and this was more obvious now that they saw her at a distance, could hardly be recognized as the same gallant ship which had left Narrowhaven. She looked a crippled, discolored hulk, which anyone might have taken for a wreck, and her officers and crew were no better, lean, pale, red-eyed from lack of sleep, and dressed in rags. As Eustace lay under a tree and heard all these plans being discussed, his heart sank. Was there going to be no rest? It looked as if the first day on the long for land was going to be quite as hard work as a day at sea. Then a delightful idea occurred to him. Nobody was looking. They were all chattering about their ship as if they actually liked the beastly thing. Why shouldn't he simply slip away? He would take a stroll inland, find a cool, airy place up in the mountains, have a good long sleep, and not rejoin the others till the day's work was over. He felt it would do him good, but he would take great care to keep the bay and the ship in sight, so as to be sure of his way back. He wouldn't like to be left behind in this country. He at once put his plan into action. He rose quietly from his place and walked away among the trees, taking care to go slowly and in an aimless manner, so that anyone who saw him would think he was merely stretching his legs. He was surprised to find how quickly the noise of conversation died behind him, and how very silent and warm and dark green the wood became. Soon he felt he could venture on a quicker and more determined stride. This soon brought him out of the wood. The ground began sloping steeply up in front of him. The grass was dry and slippery, but manageable if he used his hands as well as his feet. And though he panted and mopped his forehead a good deal, he plugged away steadily. This showed, by the way, that his new life, little as he suspected it, had already done him some good. The old Eustace, Harold and Alberta's Eustace, would have given up the climb after about 10 minutes. Slowly, and with several rests, he reached the ridge. Here he had expected to have a view into the heart of the island, but the clouds now had come lower and nearer as the sea fog was rolling to meet him. He sat down and looked back. He was now so high that the bay looked small beneath him, and the miles of sea were visible. Then the fog from the mountains closed in all around him, thick but not cold, and he lay down and turned this way and that to find the most comfortable position to enjoy himself. But he did not enjoy himself, or not for very long. He began, almost for the first time in his life, to feel lonely. At first this feeling grew very gradually, and then he began to worry about the time. There was not the slightest sound. Suddenly it occurred to him that he might have been lying there for hours. Perhaps the others had gone. Perhaps they had let him wander away on purpose, simply in order to leave him behind. He leapt up in a panic and began the descent. At first he tried to do it too quickly, slipped on steep grass, and slid for several feet. Then he thought this had carried him too far to the left, and as he came up, he had seen precipices on that side, so he clambered up again, and as near as he could guess to the place he had started from, he began the descent afresh, bearing to his right. After that, things seemed to be going better. He went very cautiously, for he could not see more than a yard ahead, and there was still perfect silence all around him. It is very unpleasant to have to go cautiously when there is a voice inside you saying all the time, "Hurry, hurry, hurry." For every moment, the terrible idea of being left behind grew stronger. If he had understood Caspian and the Pevensies at all, he would have known, of course, there was not the least chance of their doing any such thing, but he had persuaded himself that they were all fiends in human form. "At last," said Eustace as he came slithering down a side of loose stones. Scree, they called it, and found himself on the level. "And now, where are those trees? There is something dark ahead. Why, I do believe the fog is clearing." It was. The light increased every moment and made him blink. The fog lifted, and he was in an utterly unknown valley, and the sea was nowhere in sight. Chapter 6. The Adventures of Eustace. At that very moment, the others were washing hands and faces in the river, and generally getting ready for dinner and rest. The 3 best archers had gone up into the hills north of the bay, and returned laden with a pair of wild goats, which were now roasting over a fire. Caspian had ordered a cask of wine ashore, strong wine of Archenland, which had to be mixed with water before you drank it, so there would be plenty for all. The work had gone well so far, and it was a merry meal. Only after the second helping of goat did Edmund say, "Where's that blighter Eustace?" Meanwhile, Eustace stared round the unknown valley. It was so narrow and deep that the precipices which surrounded it so sheer that it was like a huge pit or trench. The floor was grassy, though strewn with rocks, and here and there Eustace saw black burnt patches, like those you see on the sides of a railway embankment in a dry summer. About 15 yards away from him was a pool of clear, smooth water. There was, at first, nothing else at all in the valley, not an animal, not a bird, not an insect. The sun beat down, the grim peaks and horns of mountains peered over the valley's edge. Eustace realized, of course, that in the fog he had come down the wrong side of the ridge, so he turned at once to see about getting back. But as soon as he had looked, he shuddered. Apparently, he had by amazing luck found the only possible way down, the long green split of land, horribly steep and narrow, with precipices on either side. There was no way possible of getting back. But he could do it now that he saw what it was. Sorry, there was no other possible way of getting back. Could he do it now that he saw what it was really like? His head swam at the very thought of it. He turned round again, thinking that at any rate he'd better have a good drink from the pool first. But as soon as he had turned, and before he had taken a step forwards into the valley, he heard a noise behind him. It was only a small noise, but it sounded loud in that immense silence. It froze him dead still where he stood for a second. Then he slewed round his neck and looked. At the bottom of the cliffs, a little off to the left hand, was a low, dark hole, the entrance to a cave perhaps, and out of this two thin wisps of smoke were coming. And the loose stones just beneath the dark hollow were moving. That was the noise he had heard, just as if something were crawling in the dark behind them. Something was crawling. Worse still, something was coming out. Edmund or Lucy or you would have recognized it at once, but Eustace had read none of the right books. The thing that came out of the cave was something he had never even imagined. A long, lead-colored snout, dull red eyes, no feathers or fur, a long, lithe body that trailed on the ground, legs whose elbows went up higher than its back like a spider's, cruel claws, bat's wings that made a rasping noise on the stone, yards of a tail. And the lines of smoke were coming from its two nostrils. He had never said the word dragon to himself, nor would it have made things better if he had. But perhaps if he had known something about dragons, he would have been a little less surprised at the dragon's behavior. It did not sit up and clap its wings, nor did it shoot out a stream of flame from its mouth. The smoke from its nostrils was like the smoke of a fire that will not last much longer. Nor did it seem to have noticed Eustace. It moved very slowly towards the pool, slowly and with many pauses. Even in his fear, Eustace felt that it was an old, sad creature. He wondered if he dared make a dash for the ascent, but it might look round if he made any noise. It might come more to life. Perhaps it was only shammering. Anyway, what was the use of trying to escape by climbing from a creature that could fly? It reached the pool and slid its horrible scaly chin down over the gravel to drink, but before it had drunk there came about it a great croaking or clanging cry, and after a few twitches and convulsions it rolled round on its side and lay perfectly still with one claw in the air. A little dark blood gushed from its wide-open mouth. The smoke from its nostrils turned black for a moment and then floated away. No more came. For a long time Eustace did not dare to move. Perhaps this was the brute's trick, the way it lured travelers to their doom. But one couldn't wait forever. He took a step nearer, then 2 steps, and halted again. The dragon remained motionless. He noticed, too, that the red fire had gone out of its eyes. At last he came up to it. He was quite sure now that it was dead. With a shudder, he touched it. Nothing happened. The relief was so great that Eustace almost laughed out loud. He began to feel as if he had fought and killed the dragon instead of merely seeing it die. He stepped over it and went to the pool for his drink. The heat was getting unbearable. He was not surprised when he heard a peal of thunder. Almost immediately afterwards, the sun disappeared, and before he had finished his drink, big drops of rain were falling. The climate of this island was a very unpleasant one. In less than a minute, Eustace was wet to his skin and half blinded with such rain as one never sees in Europe. There was no use trying to climb out of this valley as long as this lasted. He bolted for the only shelter in sight, the dragon's cave. There he lay down and tried to get his breath. Most of us know what we should expect to find in a dragon's lair, but as I said before, Eustace had read only the wrong books. They had a lot to say about exports and imports, and governments and drains. but they were weak on dragons. That is why he was so puzzled at the surface on which he was lying. Parts of it were too prickly to be stones, and too hard to be thorns, and there seemed to be a great many round, flat things, and it all clinked when he moved. There was this light enough at the there was light enough at the cave's mouth to examine it by, and of course Eustace found it to be what any of us could have told him in advance: treasure. There were crowns, those are the prickly things, coins, rings, bracelets, ingots, cups, plates, and gems. Eustace, unlike most boys, had never thought much of treasure, but he saw at once the use it would be in the new world, which he had so foolishly stumbled into through the picture in Lucy's bedroom at home. "They don't have any tax here," he said, "and you don't have to give treasure to the government. With some of this stuff, I could have quite decent time here. Perhaps in Callerman. That sounds the least phony of these countries. I wonder how much I can carry. That bracelet now. Those things in it are diamonds, probably. I'll slip that on my own wrist. Too big, but not if I push it right up here above my elbow. Then fill my pockets with diamonds. That's easier than gold. I wondered when this infernal rain's going to let up." He got into a less uncomfortable part of the pile, where it was mostly coins, and settled down to wait. But a bad fright when one is over, and especially a bad fright following a mountain walk, leaves you very tired. Eustace fell asleep. By the time he was sound asleep and snoring, the others had finished dinner and became seriously alarmed about him. They shouted, "Eustace! Eustace! Coe!" till they were hoarse, and Caspian blew his horn. "He's nowhere near, or he'd have heard that," said Lucy with white face. "Confound the fellow," said Edmund. "What on earth did he want to slink away like this for?" "But we must do something," said Lucy. "He may have got lost, or fallen into a hole, or been captured by savages." "Or killed by wild beasts," said Drinian. "Good riddance if he has, I say," muttered Rince. "Master Rince," said Reepicheep, "you never spoke a word that became you less. The creature is no friend of mine, but he is of the Queen's blood, and while he is our fellowship, it concerns our honor to find him and to avenge him if he is dead." "Of course we've got to find him, if we can," said Caspian wearily. "That's the nuisance of it. It means a search party and endless trouble. Bother Eustace." Meanwhile, Eustace slept and slept and slept. What woke him was a pain in his arm. The moon was shining in at the mouth of the cave, and the bed of treasures seemed to have grown much more comfortable. In fact, he could hardly feel it at all. He was puzzled by the pain in his arm at first, but presently it occurred to him that the bracelet, which he had shoved up above his elbow, had become strangely tight. His arm must have swollen while he was asleep. It was his left arm. He moved his right in order to feel his left, but stopped before he had moved it an inch, and bit his lip in terror, for just in front of him, a little to his right, where the moonlight fell clear on the floor of the cave, he saw a hideous shape moving. He knew that shape. It was a dragon's claw. It had moved as he had moved his hand, and became still when he stopped moving his hand. "Oh, what a fool I've been," thought Eustace. "Of course the brute had a mate and is lying beside me." For several minutes he did not dare to move a muscle. He saw two thin columns of smoke going up before his eyes, black against the moonlight, just as there had been smoke coming from the other dragon's nose before it had died. This was so alarming that he held his breath. The two columns of smoke vanished. When he could hold his breath no longer and let it out, stealthily, instantly, two jets of smoke appeared again. But even yet he had no idea of the truth. Presently, he decided that he would edge very cautiously to his left and try to creep out of the cave. Perhaps the creature was asleep, and anyway, it was his only chance. But of course, before he edged to the left, he looked to the left, and oh horror, there was a dragon's claw on that side too. No one will blame Eustace if at this moment he shed tears. He was surprised at the size of his own tears, and he saw them splashing on the treasure in front of him. They also seemed strangely hot. Steam went up from them. There was no good crying. He must try to crawl out from between the two dragons. He began extending his right arm. The dragon's foreleg and claw on his right went through exactly the same motion. Then he thought he would try his left. The dragon's limb on that side moved too. Two dragons, one on each side, mimicking whatever he did. His nerves broke, and he simply made a bolt for it. There was such a clatter and rasping and clinking of gold and grinding of stones as he rushed out of the cave that he thought they were both following him. He daren't look back. He rushed to the pool. The twisted shape of the dead dragon lying in the moonlight would have been enough to frighten anyone, but now he hardly noticed it. His idea was to get into the water. But just as he reached the edge of the pool, two things happened. Hi, Carrie. First of all, it came over him. It came over him like a thunderclap that he had been running on all fours. And why on earth had he been doing that? And secondly, as he bent towards the water, he thought for a second that yet another dragon was staring up at him out of the pool. But in an instant, he realized the truth. The dragon face in the pool was his own reflection. There was no doubt of it. It moved as he moved. It opened and shut its mouth as he opened and shut his. He had turned into a dragon while he slept. Sleeping on a dragon's hoard was greedy, dragonish thoughts in his heart, and he had become a dragon himself. That explained everything. Sure did. There had been no two dragons beside him in the cave. The claws to the right and left had been his own right and left claws. The two columns of smoke had been coming from his own nostrils. As for the pain in his left arm, or what had been his left arm, he could now see what had happened by squinting his left eye. The bracelet, which had fitted very nicely on the upper arm of a boy, was far too small for the thick, stumpy foreleg of a dragon. It had sunk deeply into his scaly flesh, and there was a throbbing bulge on each side of it. He tore at the place with his dragon teeth, but could not get it off. In spite of the pain, he was first feeling was one of relief. There was nothing to be afraid of anymore. He was a terror himself, and nothing in the world but a knight, and not all of those, would dare to attack him. He could get even with Caspian and Edmund now. But the moment he thought of this, he realized that he didn't want to. He wanted to be friends. He wanted to get back among humans and talk and laugh and share things. He realized that he was a monster cut off from the whole human race. An appalling loneliness came over him. He began to see that the others had not really been fiends at all. He began to wonder if he himself had been such a nice person as he had always supposed. He longed for their voices. He would have been grateful for a kind word, even from Reepicheep. When he thought of this, the poor dragon that had been Eustace lifted up its voice and wept. A powerful dragon, crying its eyes out under the moon in a deserted valley, is a sight and sound hardly to be imagined. At last he decided he would try to find his way back to the shore. He realized now that Caspian would never have sailed away and left him, and he felt sure that somehow or other he would be able to make people understand who he was. He took a long drink, and then, I know this sounds shocking, but it wasn't if you think it over, he ate nearly all of the dead dragon. He was halfway through it before he realized what he was doing, for, you see, though his mind was mind of Eustace, his tastes and his digestion were dragonish. And there is nothing a dragon likes so well as fresh dragon. That is why you so seldom find more than one dragon in the same country. Then he turned to climb out of the valley. He began the climb with a jump, and as soon as he jumped, he found that he was flying. He had quite forgotten about his wings, and it was a great surprise to him. The first pleasant surprise he had for a long time. He rose high into the air and saw innumerable mountain tops spread out beneath him in the moonlight. He could see the bay like a silver slab, and the dawn treader lying at anchor. The campfires twinkling in the woods beside the beach. From a great height he launched himself down towards them in a single glide. Lucy was sleeping very soundly, for she had sat up till the return of the search party in the hope of good news about Eustace. It had been led by Caspian, and had come back late and weary. Their news was disquieting. They had found no trace of Eustace, but had seen a dead dragon in a valley. They tried to make the best of it, and everyone assured everyone else that there was not likely to be more dragons about, and that one which was dead was about 3 o'clock that afternoon, which was why they had seen it, or it would hardly have been killing people a very few hours before. Unless it ate the little brat and died of him, he'd poison anything, said Rince, but he said this under his breath and no one heard it. But later in the night, Lucy was wakened very softly and found the whole company gathered close together, talking in whispers. "What is it?" said Lucy. "We must all show great constancy," Caspian was saying. "Our dragon has just flown over the treetops and lighted on the beach. Yes, I'm afraid it is between us and the ship. And arrows are of no use against dragons, and they are not friends, not at all afraid of fire." "With your majesty's leave," began Reepicheep. "No, Reepicheep," said the king very firmly. "You are not to attempt a single combat with it. Unless you promise to obey me in this matter, I'll have you tied up. We must just keep close watch, and as soon as it is light, go down into the beach and give it battle. I will lead. King Edmund will be on my right, and Lord Drinian on my left. There are no other arrangements to be made. It will be light in a couple hours. In an hour's time, let a meal be served out and what is left of the wine, and let everything be done silently." "Perhaps it will go away," said Lucy. "It'll be worse if it does," said Edmund, "because then we shan't know where it is. If there's a wasp in the room, I'd like to be able to see it." The rest of the night was dreadful, and when the meal came, though they knew they ought to eat, many found that they had very poor appetites. And endless hours seemed to pass before the darkness thinned, and birds began chirping here and there, and the world got colder and wetter than it had been all night, and Caspian said, "Now forward, friends." They got up, and with swords drawn, and formed themselves into a solid mass with Lucy in the middle and Reepicheep on her shoulder. It was nicer than the waiting about, and everyone felt fonder at everyone else than the ordinary times. A moment later they were marching. It grew lighter as they came to the edge of the wood, and there on the sand, like a giant lizard, or a flexible crocodile, or a serpent with legs, huge and horrible and humpy, lay the dragon. But when it saw them, instead of rising up and blowing fire and smoke, the dragon retreated. You could almost say it waddled back into the shallows of the bay. "What's it wagging its head like that for?" said Edmund. "And now it's nodding," said Caspian. "And there's something coming from its eyes," said Drinian. "Oh, can't you see?" said Lucy. "It's crying. Those are tears." "I shouldn't trust that, ma'am," said Drinian. "That's what crocodiles do to put you off your guard." "It waggled its head when you said that," said Edmund, just as if it meant no. "Look, there it goes again." "Do you think it understands what we're saying?" asked Lucy. The dragon nodded its head violently. Reepicheep slipped off Lucy's shoulder and stepped to the front. "Dragon," came his shrill voice, "can you understand speech?" The dragon nodded. "Can you speak?" The dragon shook its head. "Then," said Reepicheep, "it is idle to ask you of your business, but if you will swear friendship with us, raise your left foreleg above your head." It did so, but clumsily, because that leg was sore and swollen with the golden bracelet. "Oh, look," said Lucy, "there's something wrong with its leg. The poor thing. That's probably why it was crying about. Perhaps it came to us to be cured, like an Androcles and the lion." Be careful, Lucy. It's a very clever dragon, but it might be liar." Lucy had, however, already run forwards, followed by Reepicheep, as fast as his short legs could carry him, and then, of course, the boys and Drinian came too. "Show me your poor paw," said Lucy. "I might be able to cure it." The dragon, that had been Eustace, held out its sore leg gladly enough, remembering how Lucy's cordial had cured him of seasickness before he became a dragon. But he was disappointed. The magic fluid reduced the swelling and eased the pain a little, but it could not dissolve the gold. Everyone now crowded around to watch the treatment, and Caspian suddenly exclaimed, "Look!" He was staring at the bracelet. Chapter 7. How the Adventure Ended. "Look at what?" said Edmund. "Look at the device on the gold," said Caspian. "A little hammer with a diamond above it like a star," said Drinian. "I have seen that before." "Seen it?" said Caspian. "Why, of course you have. It's the sign of a great Narnian house. This is Lord Octasian's arm ring." "Villains," said the Reepicheep to the dragon. "Have you devoured a Narnian lord?" But the dragon shook his head violently. "I mean, he did eat a dragon, and that dragon might have been Octavian for all we know." "Or perhaps," said Lucy, "this is the Lord Octasian turned into a dragon under an enchantment, you know." "It needn't be either," said Edmund. "All dragons collect gold, but I think it's a safe guess that Octasian got no farther than this island. Are you the Lord Octasian? Said Lucy to the dragon, and then, when it sadly shook his head, Are you someone enchanted? Someone human, I mean. It nodded violently. And then someone said, people disputed afterwards whether it was Lucy or Edmund said it first, You're not Eustace by any chance? And Eustace nodded his terrible dragon head and thumped his tail in the sea, and everyone skipped back. Some of the sailors with eject. That's a weird way to word that. Some of the soldiers with I'm going to say a different word. Some of the soldiers with the exclamations I will not put down in writing, to avoid the enormous and boiling tears which flowed from his eyes. Lucy tried hard to console him, and even screwed up her courage to kiss the scaly face, and nearly everyone said, hard luck, and several assured Eustace that they would all stand by him, and many said they were sure to be some way of disenchanting him, and that they'd have him right as rain in a day or two. And of course they were all very anxious to hear his story, but he couldn't speak. More than once in the days that followed, he attempted to write it for them in the sand, but this never succeeded. In the first place, Eustace, never having read the right books, had no idea how to tell his story straight. And for another thing, the muscles and nerves of the dragon's claws, which he had to use, had never learned to write, and were not built for writing anyways. As a result, he never got nearly to the end before the tide came in and washed away all the writing, except the bits he had already trodden on accidentally swished out with his tail. And all that anyone had seen would be something like this. The dots are for the bits he had smudged out. Winnet to sleep. Rugs, dragon's cave, 'cause it was dead. Ain't so hard. Woke up and could get off me arm, oh bother. It was, however, clear to everyone that Eustace's character had been rather improved by becoming a dragon. He was anxious to help. He flew over the whole island and found it was all mountains and inhabited only by wild goats and droves of wild swine. Of these he brought back many carcasses as provisions for the ship. He was a very humane killer too, for he could dispatch a beast with one blow of his tail so that it didn't know, and presumably doesn't know, it had been killed. He ate a few himself, of course, but always alone. For now he was a dragon, he liked his food raw, but he could never bear to let others see him at his messy meals. And one day, flying slowly and wearily, but in great triumph, he bore back to camp a great tall pine tree, which he had torn up by its roots in a distant valley, and which could be made into a capital mast. And in the evenings, if it turned chilly, as it sometimes did under the heavy rains, he was a comfort to everyone, for the whole party would come and sit with their backs against his hot sides, and get well warmed and dried, and one puff of his fiery breath would light the most obstinate fire. Sometimes he would take a select party for a fly on his back, so that they could see the wheeling below them, the great slopes, the rocky heights, the narrow pit-like valleys, and far out over the sea, to the eastwards, a spot of darker blue on the blue horizon, which might be land. The pleasure, quite new to him, of being liked, and still more, of liking other people, was what kept Eustace from despair, for it was very dreary being a dragon. He shuddered whenever he caught sight of his own reflections as he flew over a mountain lake. He hated the huge, bat-like wings, the saw-edged ridges on his back, the cruel, curved claws. He was almost afraid to be left alone with himself, and yet he was ashamed to be with the others. On the evenings when he was not being used as a hot water bottle, he would slink away from the camp and lie curled up like a snake between the wood and the water. On such occasions, greatly to his surprise, Reepicheep was his most constant comforter. The noble mouse would creep away from the merry circle at the campfire and sit down by the dragon's head, well to the windward to be out of the way of his smoky breath. There he would explain what had happened to Eustace was a striking illustration of the turn of fortune's wheel, and that if he had Eustace at his own house in Narnia, it was really a hole, not a house, and the dragon's head, let alone his body, would not have fitted in. He could show him more than 100 examples of emperors, kings, dukes, knights, poets, lovers, astronomers, philosophers, and magicians who had fallen from prosperity into the most distressing circumstances, and of whom many had recovered and lived happily ever afterwards. It did not perhaps seem so very comforting at the time, but it was kindly meant, and Eustace never forgot it. But of course, what hung over everyone like a cloud was the problem of what to do with their dragon when they were ready to sail. They tried not to talk of it when he was there, but he couldn't help overhearing things like, would he fit all along one side of the deck, and we'd have to shift all the shores to the other side down below so as to balance, or would towing him be any good, or wouldn't he be able to fly? Sorry, would he be able to keep up by flying? And most often of all, but how are we to feed him? And poor Eustace realized more and more that since the first day he had come on board, he had been an unmitigated nuisance, and that he was now a greater nuisance still. And this ate into his mind, just as that bracelet ate into his foreleg. He knew that it only made it worse to tear at it with his great teeth, but he couldn't help tearing now and then, especially on hot nights. About 6 days after they had landed on Dragon's Island, Edmund happened to wake up very early one morning. It was just getting gray, so that you could see the tree trunks if they were between you and the bay, but not in the other direction. And as he woke, he thought he heard something moving, so he raised himself on one elbow and looked about him. And presently he thought he saw a dark figure moving on the seaward side of the wood. The idea that at once occurred to his mind was, are we so sure there are no natives on this island after all? Then he thought it was Caspian. It was about the right size, but he knew that Caspian had been sleeping next to him and could see that he hadn't moved. Edmund made sure that his sword was in place and then rose to investigate. He came down softly to the edge of the wood, and the dark figure was still there. He saw now that it was too small for Caspian, and too big for Lucy. It did not run away. Edmund drew his sword and was about to challenge the stranger when the stranger in a low voice said, "Is that you, Edmund?" "Yes, who are you?" "Don't you know me?" said the other. "It's me, Eustace." "By Jove," said Edmund, "so it is, my dear chap." "Hush," said Eustace, and lurched as if he were going to fall. "Hello," said Edmund, setting him. "What's up? Are you ill?" Eustace was silent for so long that Edmund thought he was fainting, but at last he said, "It's been ghastly. You don't know, but it's all right now. Could we go talk somewhere? I don't want to meet the others just yet." "Yes, rather anywhere you like," said Edmund. "We can go and sit on the rocks over there. I say, I'm glad to see you are looking yourself again. You must have had a pretty beastly time." They went to the rocks and sat down, looking out across the bay, where the sky got paler and paler, and the stars disappeared except for one very bright one low down and near the horizon. "I won't tell you how I became a dragon, till I can tell the others and get it all over," said Eustace. "By the way, I don't even know it was a dragon till I heard you all using the word when I turned up here the other morning. But I want to tell you how I stopped being one." "Fire ahead," said Edmund. "Well, last night I was more miserable than ever, and that beastly arm thing was hurting like anything." "Is that all right now?" Eustace laughed, a different laugh from any Edmund had heard him give before, and slipped the bracelet easily off his arm. "There it is," he said, "as anyone who likes can have it as far as I'm concerned. Well, as I say, I was lying awake and wondering what on earth would become of me. Then, but mind you, it may have all been a dream, I don't know." "Go on," said Edmund with considerable patience. "Well, anyway, I looked up and saw the very last thing I expected. A huge lion coming slowly towards me. And one queer thing was that there was no moon last night. There was no moonlight where the lion was, so it came nearer and nearer. I was terribly afraid of it. You might think that being a dragon could have knocked any lion out easily enough, but it wasn't that kind of fear. I wasn't afraid of it eating me. I was just afraid of it, if you can understand. Well, it came close up to me and looked straight into my eyes, and I shut my eyes tight. That wasn't any good, because it told me to follow it." "You mean it spoke?" "I don't know. Now that you mention it, I don't think it did, but it told me all the same. And I knew I would have to do what it told me, so I got up and followed it. And it led me a long way into the mountains. And there was always this moonlight over and around the lion wherever it went." One moment. Sorry. Inhaled some water.
Carry some apple.
Yes, led me a long way into the mountains. And there was always this moonlight over and around the lion, wherever we went. So at last we came to the top of a mountain I'd never seen before, and on the top of this mountain was a garden, trees and fruit and everything. In the middle of it there was a well. I knew it was a well because you could see the water bubbling up from the bottom of it, but it was a lot bigger than most wells, like a very big round bath with marble steps going down into it. The water was as clear as anything, and I thought if I could get in there and bathe, it would ease the pain in my leg. The lion told me I must undress first. Mind you, I don't know if he said the words out loud or not. I was just going to say that I couldn't undress because I hadn't any clothes on, when I suddenly thought that dragons are sneaky sort of things, and snakes can cast their skins. Of course, thought I. That's what the lion means. So I started scratching myself, and my scales began coming off all over the place. Then I scratched a little deeper. Instead of just scales coming out here and there, my whole skin started peeling off. Beautifully, like it does after an illness, or if I were a banana. This is so weird. In a minute, or two, I just stepped out of it. I could see it lying there beside me, looking rather nasty. It was a most lovely feeling, so I started to go down into the well for my bath. But just as I was going to put my feet in the water, I looked down and saw that they were all hard and rough and wrinkled and scaly, just as they'd been before. Oh, that's all right, said I. It only means I had another smaller suit on underneath the first one, and I'll have to get out of it too. So I scratched and tore again, and this underskin peeled off beautifully, and out I stepped, and I left it lying beside the other one and went down to the well for my bath. Well, exactly the same thing happened again, and I thought to myself, oh dear, however many skins have I got to take off? For I was longing to bathe my leg. So I scratched away for the third time and got off a third skin, just like the two others, and stepped out of it. But as soon as I looked at myself in the water, I knew it had been no good. Then the lion said, but I don't know if it spoke, you'll have to let me undress you. I was afraid of his claws, I can tell you, but I was pretty nearly desperate now, so I just lay flat down on my back and let him do it. The very first tear he made was so deep that I thought he was going right into my heart. When he pulled the skin off, it hurt worse than anything I've ever felt. The only thing he made me able to bear it was the pleasure of feeling the stuff peel off. You know, if you ever picked a scab off a sore place, it hurts like a billy. Oh, but it is fun to see it coming away. I know exactly what you mean, said Edmund. Well, he peeled the beastly stuff right off, just as I thought I'd done myself the other 3 times, only they hadn't hurt. And there it was, lying on the grass, only ever so much thicker and darker and more knobbly looking than the others had been. And there was I, smooth and soft as a peeled switch, and smaller than I had been. Then he caught hold of me. I didn't like that much, for I was very tender underneath now that I'd no skin on, and threw me into the water. It smarted like anything, but only for a moment. After that, it became perfectly delicious, and as soon as I started swimming and splashing, I found that all the pain had gone from my arm, and then I saw why. I turned into a boy again. You'd think me simply phony if I told you how I felt about my own arms. I know they're no muscle, and are pretty moldy compared with Caspian's, but I was so glad to see them. After a bit, the lion took me out and dressed me. Dressed you? With his paws? Well, I don't exactly remember that bit, but he did somehow or other, in new clothes. Same I've got on now, as a matter of fact. And then suddenly I was back here, which is what makes me think it must have been a dream. No, it wasn't a dream, said Edmund. Why not? Well, there are these clothes for one thing, and you have been, well, undragoned for another. What do you think it was then? Said Eustace. I think you've seen Aslan, said Edmund. Aslan, said Eustace. I've heard that name mentioned several times since we joined the Dawn Treader, and I felt, I don't know what, I hated it. But I was hating everything then. By the way, I'd like to apologize. I'm afraid I've been pretty beastly. That's all right, said Edmund. Between ourselves, you hadn't been bad. Oh, yeah, between ourselves, you hadn't been as bad as I was on my first trip to Narnia. You were only an ass, but I was a traitor. That is true. Thinking on it, Edmund actually might be the best person to have this redemption arc with. Well, don't tell me about it then, said Eustace. But who is Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me. Have we hit ads? Love? What?
Yeah. 1 minute.
Okay, I just want to keep track of it. But who is Aslan? Do you know him? Well, he knows me, said Edmund. He's a great lion, the son of the Emperor over sea, who saved me and saved Narnia. We've all seen him. Lucy sees him most often, and it may be Aslan's country we're sailing to. Neither said anything for a while. The last bright star had vanished, and though they could not see the sunrise because of the mountains on their right, they knew it was going on because the sky above them and the bay before them turned the color of roses. Then some bird of the parrot kind screamed in the wood behind them. They heard movements among the trees, and finally a blast on Caspian's horn. The camp was astir. Great was the rejoicing when Edmund and the restored Eustace walked into the breakfast circle round the campfire. And okay, we're gonna pause that then. Everybody who's still hanging out here, maybe it's time to go get yourself a drink. Use the bathroom if you need to. Get more comfy. There we go. Sometimes the button for unmuting does not work. Welcome back, peeps. We will resume. Great was the rejoicing when Edmund and the restored Eustace walked into the breakfast circle round the campfire. And now, of course, everyone heard the earlier part of his story. People wondered whether the other dragon had killed the Lord Octasian several years ago, or whether Octasian himself had been the old dragon. The jewels with which Eustace had crammed his pockets in the cave had disappeared along with the clothes he had been wearing, but no one, least of all Eustace himself, felt any desire to go back to that valley for more treasure. In a few days now, the Dawn Treader remasted, repainted, and well stored was ready to sail. Before they embarked, Caspian caused to be cut on a smooth cliff facing the bay the words, Dragon Island, discovered by Caspian X, King of Narnia, etc., in the 4th year of his reign. Here, as we suppose, the Lord Octasian had his death. It would be nice and fairly true to say, from that time forth Eustace was a different boy. To be strictly accurate, he began to be a different boy. He had relapses. There were still many days when he could be very tiresome, but most of those I shall not notice. The cure had begun. The Lord Octasian's arm ring had a curious fate. Eustace did not want it and offered it to Caspian, and Caspian offered it to Lucy. She did not care about having it. Very well, then. Catch as catch can, said Caspian, and flung it up in the air. This is when they were all standing looking at the inscription. Up went the ring, flashing into the sunlight, and caught and hung as neatly as a well-throwed quoit on a little projection on the rock. No one could climb up to get it from below, and no one could climb down to get it from above. And there, for all I know, it is hanging still, and may hang till the world ends. Chapter 8. 2 Narrow Escapes. Everyone was cheerful as the Dawn Treader sailed from Dragon Island. They had fair winds as soon as they were out of the bay, and came early the next morning to the unknown island, which some of them had seen while flying over the mountains, while Eustace was still a dragon. It was a low green island, inhabited by nothing but rabbits and a few goats. But from the ruins of stone huts, and from blackened places where fires had been, they judged that it had been peopled not long before. There was also some bones and broken weapons. Pirates' work, said Caspian. Or the dragon, said Edmund. The only other thing they found there was a little skin boat or coracle on the sands. It was made of hide stretched over a wicker framework. It was a tiny boat, barely 4 feet long, and the paddle which lay in it was in proportion. They thought that either it had been made for a child or else that the people of that country had been dwarfs. Reepicheep decided to keep it, as it was just the right size for him, so it was taken on board. They called that land Burnt Island and sailed away before noon. For some 5 days they ran before a south-southeast wind, out of sight of all land, seeing neither fish nor gull. Then they had a day when it rained hard till the afternoon. Eustace lost 2 games of chess to Reepicheep, began to get like his old and disagreeable self again, and Edmund said he wished they could have gone to America with Susan. Then Lucy looked out into the stern window and said, "Hello, I do believe it's stopping." "And what's that?" They all tumbled up to the poop and found that the rain had stopped, and that Drinian, who was on watch, was also staring hard at something astern, or rather, at several things. They looked a little like smooth rounded rocks, a whole line of them, with intervals at about 40 feet between. "But they can't be rocks," he said, "because they weren't there 5 minutes ago." "And one's just disappearing," said Lucy. "Yes, and there's another one coming up," said Edmund. "And nearer," said Eustace. "Hang it," said Caspian. "The whole thing is moving this way." "And moving a great deal quicker than we can sail, sire," said Drinian. "It'll be up with us in a minute." They all held their breaths, for it is not at all nice to be pursued by an unknown something, either on land or sea. But what it turned out to be was far worse than anyone had suspected. Suddenly, only about the length of a cricket pitch from the port side, an appalling head reared itself out of the sea. It was all greens and vermilions, with purple blotches, except where shellfish clung to it, and shaped rather like a horse's, though without ears. It had enormous eyes made for staring through the dark depths of the ocean, and a gaping mouth filled with double rows of sharp, fish-like teeth. It came up on what they first took to be a huge neck, But as more of it emerged, everyone knew that it was not its neck, but its body, and that at last they were seeing what so many foolishly wanted to see, the great sea serpent. The folds of a gigantic tail could be seen far away, rising at intervals from the surface, and now its head was towering up higher than the mast. Every man rushed to his weapons, but there was nothing to be done. The monster was out of reach. "Shoot! Shoot!" cried the bear master bowman, and several obeyed, but the arrows glanced off the sea serpent's hide as if it were iron-plated. Then, for a dreadful minute, everyone was still, staring up at its eyes and mouth, and wondering where it would pounce. But it didn't pounce. It shot its head forward across the ship, on level with the yard of the mast. Now its head was just beside the fighting top. Still it stretched and stretched till its head was over the starboard bulwark. Then down it began to come, not onto the crowded deck, but onto the water, so that the whole ship was under an arch of serpent. And almost at once that arch began to get smaller. Indeed, on the starboard of the sea serpent was now almost touching the Dawn Treader's side. Eustace, who had really been trying very hard to behave well till the rain and the chest put him back, now did the first brave thing he had ever done. He was wearing a sword that Caspian had lent him. As soon as the serpent's body was near enough on the starboard side, he jumped onto the bulwark and began hacking with it with all his might. It was true that he had accomplished nothing beyond breaking Caspian's second-best sword into bits, but it was a fine thing for a beginner to have done. Others would have joined him if at that moment Reepicheep had not called out, "Don't fight! Push!" It was so unusual for the mouse to advise anyone not to fight that even in that terrible moment, every eye turned to him. And when he jumped up onto the bulwark, forward of the snake, and set his little furry back against its huge, scaly, slimy back, and began pushing as hard as he could, quite a number of people saw what he meant, and rushed to both sides of the ship to do the same. And when a moment later the sea serpent's head appeared again, this time on the port side. I'm trying to fix my phone. Here we go. And this time with its back to them, then everyone understood. The brute had made a loop of itself around the Dawn Treader and was beginning to draw the loop tight. When it got quite tight, snap, there would be a floating matchwork where the ship had been, and it could pick them out of the water one by one. Their only chance was to push the loop backwards till it slid over the stern, or else, to put the same thing another way, to push the ship forwards out of the loop. Reepicheep alone had, of course, no more chance of doing this than of lifting up of the cathedral. But he had nearly killed himself with trying before others shoved him aside. Very soon the whole ship's company, except Lucy and the mouse, who was fainting, was in two long lines along the two bulwarks, each man's chest to the back of the man in front, so that the weight of the whole line was of the last man pushing for their lives. For a few sickening seconds, which seemed like hours, nothing appeared to happen. Joints cracked, sweat dropped, breath came in grunts and gasps. Then they felt the ship was moving. They saw that the snake loop was further from the mast than it had been. They also saw that it was smaller, and now the real danger was at hand. Could they get it over the poop, or was it already too tight? Yes, it would just fit. It was resting on the poop rails. A dozen or more sprang up on the poop. This was far better. The sea serpent's body was so low now that they could make a line across the poop and push side by side. Hope rose high till everyone remembered the high curved stern, the dragon's tail of the Dawn Treader. It would be quite impossible to get the brute over that. "An axe!" cried Caspian hoarsely. "And still shove!" Lucy, who knew where everything was, heard him where she was standing on the main deck, staring up at the poop. In a few seconds she had been below, got the axe, and was rushing up the ladder to the poop. But just as she reached the top, there came a great crashing noise, like a tree coming down, and the ship rocked and darted forwards. For at that very moment, whether because the serpent was being pushed so hard, or because it foolishly decided to draw the noose tight, the whole of the curved stern broke off, and the ship was free. The others were too exhausted to see what Lucy saw. There, a few yards behind them, the loop of the serpent's body got rapidly smaller and disappeared into a splash. Lucy always said, but of course she was very excited at the moment, and it might have only imagined it, that she saw a look of idiotic satisfaction on the creature's face. What is certain is that it was a very stupid animal, for instead of pursuing the ship, it turned its head round and began nosing all along its own body, as if expecting to find the wreckage of the Dawn Treader there. But the Dawn Treader was already well away, running before a fresh breeze, and the men lay and sat panting and groaning all about the deck, till presently they were able to talk about it, and then to laugh about it. And when some rum had been served out, and they even raised a cheer, and everyone praised the valor of Eustace, though it hadn't done any good, and of Reepicheep. After this, they sailed for 3 days more, and saw nothing but sea and sky. On the 4th day, the wind changed to the north, and the seas began to rise. By the afternoon, it had nearly become a gale, but at the same time they sighted land on the port bow. "By your leave, sire," said Drinian, "we will try to get under the lee of that country by rowing and lie in harbor, maybe till this is over." Caspian agreed, but a long row against the gale did not bring them to the land before evening. By the last light of the day, they steered into a natural harbor and anchored, but no one went ashore that night. In the morning, they found themselves in the green bay of a rugged, lonely-looking country which sloped up to a rocky summit. From the windy north, beyond that summit, clouds came streaming rapidly. They lowered the boat and loaded her with any of the water casks which were now empty. Which stream shall we water at, Drinian?" said Caspian as he took his seat in the stern sheets of the boat. There seemed to be 2 coming down into the bay. "It makes little odds, sire," said Drinian, "but I think it's a shorter pull to that on the starboard, the eastern one." "Here comes the rain," said Lucy. "I should think it does," said Edmund, for it was already pelting hard. "I say let's go to the other stream. There are trees there, and we'll have some shelter." "Yes, let's," said Eustace. "No point getting wetter than we need." But all the time, Drinian was steadily steering to starboard, like tiresome people in cars who continue at 40 miles an hour while you are explaining to them that they are on the wrong road. They're right, Drinian," said Caspian. "Why don't you bring her head round and make for the western stream?" "As your majesty pleases," said Drinian a little shortly. He had an anxious day with the weather yesterday, and didn't like advice from landsmen. But he altered course, and it turned out afterwards that this was a good thing he did. By the time they had finished watering, the rain was over, and Caspian, with Eustace and the Pevensies and Reepicheep, decided to walk up to the top of the hill and see what could be seen. It was a stiffish climb through coarse grass and heather, and there were neither man nor beasts, except seagulls. When they reached the top, they saw that it was a very small island, not more than 20 acres, and from the height of the sea looked larger and more desolate than it did from the deck, or even the fighting top of the Dawn Treader. "Crazy, you know," said Eustace to Lucy in a low voice, looking at the eastern horizon. "Sailing on and on into that, with no idea what might get to." But he only said it out of habit, not really nastily as he would have done at one time. It was too cold to stay long on the ridge, for the wind still blew freshly from the north. "Don't let's get back the same way," said Lucy as they turned. "Let's go along a bit and come down by the other stream, the one Drinian wanted to go to." Everyone agreed to this, and after about 15 minutes they were at the source of the second river. It was a more interesting place than they had expected. A deep little mountain lake surrounded by cliffs except for a narrow channel on the seaward side out of which the water flowed. Here at last they were out of the wind. They all sat down in the heather above the cliff for a rest. All sat down but one, it was Edmund, jumped up again very quickly. They go in for sharp stones on this island," he said, groping about in the heather. "Where is that wretched thing? Ah, now I've got it. Hello! It wasn't a stone at all. It was a sword hilt. Oh, by Jove, it's a whole sword, with what the rust has left of it. It must have lain here for ages." "Narnian too, by the look of it," said Caspian, as they all crowded round. "I'm sitting on something too," said Lucy. "Something hard." It turned out to be the remnants of a mail shirt. By this time, everyone was on hands and knees, feeling in the thick heather in every direction. Their search revealed, one by one, a helmet, a dagger, and a few coins, not Calorman crescents, but genuine Narnian, lions and trees, such as you might see any day in the marketplace of Beaversdam or Baruna. Looks as if this might all be what's left of one of our 7 lords," said Edmund. "Just what I was thinking," said Caspian. I wonder which it was. There's nothing on the dagger to show, and I wonder how he died. And how we are to avenge him, added Reepicheep. Edmund, the only one of the party who had read several detective stories, had meanwhile been thinking. Look here, he said. There's something very fishy about this. He can't have been killed in a fight. Why not? Said Caspian. No bones, said Edmund. An enemy might take the armor and leave the body, but who ever heard of a chap who'd won a fight carrying away the body and leaving the armor? Perhaps he was killed by a wild animal, Lucy suggested. It'd be a clever animal, said Edmund, that would take a man's male shirt off. Perhaps a dragon, said Caspian. Sorry. Nothing doing, said Eustace. Nothing doing, said Eustace. A dragon couldn't do it. I ought to know. Well, let's get away from this place anyway, said Lucy. She had not felt like sitting down again since Edmund had raised the question of bones. If you like, said Caspian, getting up. I don't think any of this stuff is worth taking anyway. They came down and round to the little opening where the stream came out of the lake and stood looking at the deep water within the circle of cliffs. It had been a hot day. No doubt some would have been tempted to bathe, and everyone would have had a drink. Indeed, even as it was, Eustace was on the very point of stooping down and scooping up some water in his hands when Reepicheep and Lucy both at the same moment cried, "Look!" So he forgot about his drink and looked. The bottom of the pool was made of large grayish-blue stones, and the water was perfectly clear, and on the bottom lay a life-size figure of a man, made apparently of gold. It lay face down, with its arms stretched out above its head, and it so happened that as they looked at it, the clouds parted and the sun shone out. The golden shape was lit up from end to end. Lucy thought it was the most beautiful statue she had ever seen. Well, whistled Caspian, that's worth coming to see. I wonder, can we get it out? We can die for it, sire, said Reepicheep. No good at it. No good at all, said Edmund. At least, if it's really gold, solid gold, it'd be far too heavy to bring up, and that pool's 12 or 15 feet deep, if it's an inch. Half a moment, though. It's a good thing I've brought a hunting spear with me. Let's see what the depth is like. Hold on to my hand, Caspian, while I lean out of the water a bit. Caspian took his hand, and Edmund leaned forwards, began to lower his spear into the water. Before it was halfway in, Lucy said, I don't believe the statue is gold at all. It's only the light. The spear looks just the same color. What's wrong? Asked several voices at once, for Edmund had suddenly let go of the spear. I couldn't hold it, gasped Edmund. It seemed so heavy. And there it is on the bottom now, said Caspian. And Lucy's right. It looks just the same color as the statue. But Edmund, who appeared to be having some trouble with his boots, at least he was bending down and looking at them, straightened himself at once and shouted out in a sharp voice, which people hardly ever disobey, Get back! Back from the water, all of you, at once! They all did and stared at him. Look, said Edmund. Look at the toes of my boots. They look a bit yellow, began Eustace. They're gold, solid gold, interrupted Edmund. Look at them, feel them. The leather's pulled away from it already, and they're as heavy as lead. By Aslan, said Caspian. You don't mean to say. Yes, I do, said Edmund. That water turns things into gold. It turned the spear into gold. That's why it got so heavy. And it was just lapping against my feet. It's a good thing I wasn't barefoot. And it turned the toe caps into gold. And that poor fellow on the bottom, well, you see. So it wasn't a statue at all, said Lucy in a low voice. No, the whole thing is plain now. He was here on a hot day. He undressed to the top of the cliff where we were sitting. The clothes have rotted away or been taken by birds to line their nests with. The arm is still there. Then he dived and... Don't, said Lucy. What a horrible thing. And what a narrow shave we've had, said Edmund. Narrow indeed, said Reepicheep. Anyone's finger, anyone's foot, anyone's whisker, or anyone's tail might have slipped into the water at any moment. All the same, said Caspian. We might as well test it. He stooped low and wrenched up a spray of heather. Then, very cautiously, he knelt beside the pool and dipped it in. It was heather that he dipped. What he drew out was a perfect model of heather made of the purest gold, heavy and soft as lead. The king who owned this island, said Caspian slowly, and his face flushed as he spoke, would soon be the richest of all the kings of the world. I claim this land forever as a Narnia possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island, and I bind all of you to secrecy. No one must know of this, Not even Drinian. On pain of death, do you hear? Who are you talking to? Said Edmund. I'm no subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way around. I'm the one of the 4 ancient sovereigns of Narnia, and you're under my allegiance to the High King, my brother. So it has come to that, King Edmund Hesed, said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. Oh, stop it, both of you, said Lucy. That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Oh! Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw that she had seen. Across the grey hillside above them, grey, for the heather had not yet in bloom, without noise and without looking at them, and shining as if he were bright sunlight through the sun, though the sun had in fact gone in, passed with slow pace the hugest lion that human eyes had ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterwards, it was the size of an elephant, though at another time she only said the size of a cart horse. But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan. And nobody ever saw how or where he went. They looked at one another like people waking from a sleep. What were we talking about? Said Caspian. Have I been making rather an ass of myself? Sire, said Reepicheep, this is a place with a curse on it. Let us get back on board at once, and if I might have the honor of naming this island, I should call it Deathwater. That strikes me a very good name, Reep, Caspian. But now I come to think of it, I don't know why. But the weather seems to be settling, and I dare say Drinian would like to be off. What a lot we shall have to tell him. But in fact, he had not much to tell, for the memory of the last hour had all become confused. Their Majesties all seemed a bit bewitched when they came aboard, said Drinian to Rince, some hours later when the Dawn Treader was once more under sail and Deathwater Island already below the horizon. Something's happened to them in that place. The only thing I could think clear was that they've found the body of one of the lords we were looking for. You don't say so, Captain, answered Rince. Well, that's 3. Only 4 more. At this rate, we might come home soon after New Year. And a good thing, too. My bases are running a bit low. Good night, sir. And I think that's a good point to call it right now. Especially since I think the next one might be scary. Yeah, but I don't want to give him nightmares. Besides, I was tired of reading now. We got halfway through Caspian, the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for the story. I'll see you again next Sunday. And if any of you are asleep, I hope you have good dreams. Bye-bye.